So time goes by in the turbo lift, and Spock keeps asking his questions, which he's supposed to ask. He's supposed to ask away, and they're talking about the food synthesizers, and it comes up that related to that, it comes up that number one's name is Una, and again she tells him not to refer to her by her name, but or her rank, but to call her by her nickname, number one. So after spending what seems to be a lot of time in the elevator, both sitting down, and the turbo lift, both sitting down, number one finally decides to get up and try to find a way out. And the fact that they would spend this amount of time in the turbo lift and the transporter not be, brought up as a solution is mind-boggling to say the least. So number one tells Spock to get on his knees and hoist her, and she starts to fiddle around with some of the control panels inside the turbo lift itself until she gets shocked and they both fall. But before getting shocked, Spock keeps asking her questions, and he asks her about, as he's holding her, he is asking her if she's ever made observations of a certain kind of star. And she says that she did. She, at a certain mission, she did. And Spock proceeds to say that he is envious of her having had that experience. And even though he's not expressing emotion, that response to me feels off. I think that if Leonard Nimoy would have, he's expressing an emotion, even though he's just verbalizing it, without giving much emotion. But he, in this case, Leonard Nimoy probably would have answered something like, if his writing staff and himself would have probably answered something like fascinating experience, instead of saying I am envious, of you having experienced that. So again, even though it's not an emotional outburst, it's the Vulcans, in this case Spock specifically, his emotions are too close to the surface. So number one gets shocked, and she falls, and Spock falls with her. They both fall. And the person from engineering, the woman from engineering who's helping them, via communications, she says, "Are you all right, number one?" And again, you're not addressing the first officer of a vessel as number one. You're not talking to the second in command of the Enterprise as by their nickname. It's totally inappropriate, and this just goes to this just goes to the back to the whole thing about the writing staff. They just don't know what they're doing. So the woman from engineering who's talking to number one tells her, what we're going to do is have Lieutenant Amin rappel down to the turbo lift from a higher level. And and this cracks me up every time I hear it. She says she's a champion climber. So again, forget the whole thing about having a transporter, which you just got off this transporter, by the way, Spock. And so, and it seems to me like they're, from the episode, it seems like they've spent a long time, maybe hours in this situation. And, it's just, well, this champion climber is going to come get them. So, well, this is what we got. So now, number one is a little frustrated at the fact that they have, they've been there for a while, and they should have to wait for them to be taken out of the turbo lift. And she kind of unzips her collar and kind of to let people know that she's loosening the mood and trying to relax a little bit, let the frustration go. And she asks Spock that, did I see you smiling when you transported onto the ship? So she tells Spock that it was kind of disconcerting to see him smile, and not that she would, prohibit any or ask any of her officers to suppress their feelings or expressions, but she says that if if your goal is command, and she thinks that his goal is command, there's certain things that he needs to keep to himself. So, this is utterly this is just ridiculous, because the fact that number one has to tell the Vulcan, think about it. She's telling the Vulcan, she's telling Spock to keep his emotions in check. So, I don't know. This whole thing is just getting very comical. It's the best. You got to take this in. You got to take this in a laughing manner, because otherwise, it's you'd end up pulling your hair out from watching this. So Spock kind of insinuates a question back to her about, he says this brings up a logical question, doesn't actually ask it. The question is obviously, how do you hold your in command position? How do you hold your emotions or your feelings in check? And she says, I'll show you. And it's implied that, when she's by herself, she has this release. And so this release is that she starts singing Gilbert and Sullivan. And this is, this obviously it's a very believable release for we've seen in Star Trek before how Will Riker, played the trombone. What did he play? I forget exactly what he played. He plays the trombone, and like Beverly Crusher used to tap dance and do plays and organize plays, and a lot of the cast and TNG would participate in the characters would participate in the plays that Beverly organized, and John-Luc played his little flute, a recorder. I forget exactly what it was called. This is this is an acceptable moment in it, but it leads directly into a very unacceptable moment. And this very unacceptable moment is that, this is the image that we're all left with when watching this short trek. And it's the image of Spock when she finishes. It's the image of Spock starting to sing and then has this emotional outburst of, laughter. And, again, what can we say about this? It's just, it's utterly shocking. It makes no sense. And obviously, this is where, this is the state of affairs, with regards to what they are doing to, this is committing a homicide of Spock, basically, of the character of Spock. It's just, you know, it's totally just not respecting, and it's not respecting what came before. And they could do amazing things. And again, the problem here is that the writer's room can explore all they want, and it can be exciting, and they can deviate, but you have to do it within the frame of established canon. It doesn't mean you can't explore and do new things. And this is where this is what mostly worries me about Kurtzman and people, the people in charge here, is that you don't you can explore and deviate and do new things for Trek, but you don't have to trash what came before and work completely outside of the framework. That framework gives Star Trek credibility. It gives Star Trek credibility amongst the fans. And that's why, that's why there's they say there's a division in the fan base. And some people have said, and I even heard Kurtzman in an interview say, well, 50-50's fan split is a division in the fan base is good. It's healthy. First of all, it's not healthy. And if you have a 50-50 split in the fan base, you're doing something wrong. It's not, it's like, let's use the analogy of a teacher who fails half their class. If a teacher or professor fails half their class, the problem isn't the student. The problem is the teacher. So the problem here is the direction, and not just the direction, but how things are done in putting Star Trek together. So, well, let's move on. But wait, before we move on, there's something that's coming to my mind that I just want to point out. We mentioned before that Kurtzman talked about the 50-50 split in the fan base, but it's been my experience and experience of several other YouTubers that the split in the fan base is not 50-50. And if you look at some polls that are out there, and if you look at certain other things, the split is probably more like 70-30. And it's really 2/3 of traditional Star Trek fans that are upset. And that means the majority is upset. And it's definitely not 50-50. It's definitely a majority. It's probably like 60 or 70% are upset. And then there's a few people who are in a gray area because they can go ahead and watch this and enjoy it to a certain extent, but they're not really completely on board with it either. So, and then there's people who of course love it. So, and good for them. If somebody's enjoying this, well, then, good for them. But again, I just wanted to point out that it's not 50-50. There's no way it's 50-50. It's more than that. And one more thing I want to point out before moving on, because this has been on my mind too, is that, we said here that we're all left with this image of Spock laughing with his emotional outburst. And yes, in 1988, the original, pilot from the 60s was released, The Cage. And, we do see Spock smiling in there and having, showing some emotion. We also have to And so this is also part of the reason that a lot of the, creators of, a lot of the fans and also people involved with Star Trek Discovery production are, they're saying that, well, listen, Spock in the cage was, had these moments. And is it true? Of course it's true. But you also have to bear in mind that Gene Roddenberry had just created it. He was finding his footing. He was finding his footing with regards to Spock and the Vulcans. He was fighting to get his show, on network television. So he was, Gene probably would have been, he definitely would have been more radical if he didn't have to, get his foot in the door somehow. And there was only so much innovation that he could do in many senses, in many areas. So, so the whole thing about, Gene spends the next several decades building, what the Vulcans are and who Spock is and what Vulcans are and how Vulcans, behave and then the people who, literally were disciples, the production team that were disciples of Roddenberry, carried on his work and have done so until very recently. And they've, they added to Gene's work in the spirit, in Gene's spirit. And it doesn't mean they were, they stopped being creative. It's just that they did it in a Gene Roddenberry way. So, to justify doing Spock this way because in the pilot episode that never aired till 1988. It's from the 60s and it never aired till 1988. To say that we're going to, this is the way Gene envisioned it. No, because Gene was finding his footing and Gene made it very clear and he made it very clear what his intention was with Spock and the Vulcans. And this was not it. So anyway, they hear a tap and Lieutenant Amin, who is a champion climber, finally has reached the turbo lift and opens the top and rescues them basically. So she lowers a rope with a handle and number one goes out with holding onto a rope with one hand, and she's lifted out into this vast space inside the ship that they have, which looks more like the inside of a Borg ship with all that space than the Federation ship. But anyway, so finally the images turn to being on the bridge, and Spock walks on the bridge, and Captain Pike, asks number one, "Oh, this is the new guy, right?" And Spock, goes to attention, and he says, at ease, Spock, and Spock says, "It's not my strong suit, sir." And again, this is basically where just the writing staff does not understand. They don't understand the character. They don't understand the character of Spock. And I do think Michael Chabon understands Spock, by the way. And I know this is Michael Chabon's short trek, but to be honest, I think that Chabon is probably, up to his ears in Picard. Maybe he wrote this, and maybe he wrote this last year, or who knows when he wrote it. And this is being, interpreted it. His story is being interpreted by maybe by the current writing team from Discovery. So I don't know what, I don't know exactly what the possible, the details are, and the possibilities could be many, but I just don't think this is representative of Chabon's work. I think we're really going to have to wait till the end of season 1 of Picard to see if what Michael Chabon's about. I don't think this is representative of his work, to be honest. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. A lot of people in our community are going to disagree, but I think we need to give this new Picard showrunner a little leeway, and hopefully he's given the opportunity to shine. Now, I just want to finish pointing out that when Spock says to Captain Pike, "It's not my strong suit," this is again where the writing staff doesn't understand Spock. They just don't understand the character. Nimoy would not have said, "It's not my strong suit." Nimoy would have just raised an eyebrow. He would have said, "Yes, sir." He would have said, this whole idea that Spock has to express what is inside is, verbally express. Like just before, when we were talking about him being envious, he told, number one, that he was envious of her experience with observing the star. It's not Spock. And so this is when we were talking before about these basic mistakes. These basic mistakes are in their writing are being made left and right. And some people could say that, they're basically trailblazing, and they're going in a whole different direction, a whole different interpretation, which, might be partly true. But again, that's not, then, then it's not Star Trek. It's something else. And whoever is, well, let's leave it at that. It's not Star Trek.